Three Righteous Mamas is a podcast from The Signal that is on a mission to transform our country. We tell the stories that matter, celebrate the power and hope of pissed off mamas who are building a better future for all of our children. Hi, I'm Muna Husseini.
And I'm Cristina Sensun Ramirez.
And I'm Martha Pincoffs.
So we love being in conversation with y'all. We love being in conversation with y'all. Please subscribe and leave us a review. And y'all, we're actually getting reviews on the site, and I'd love to read one from Marcella Austin Mama. She says, this podcast is exactly what we need right now. Listening to these amazing women in conversation makes me feel hopeful and optimistic that discourse is alive and well. We can place high value on the many roles women who are mothers participate in. The lens is dynamic and rich. I love the guests and conversation. Well, Marcella Austin Mama, we love you too. Welcome to the Three Righteous Mamas family. And to all of the rest of y'all, please leave us reviews, share with your friends. And another little announcement, we've got merchandise. Christina, can you model for us?
Oh my God, I'm so excited, y'all. Our store at threerighteousmamas.com is up, and I got myself a hoodie. And it's like, it says Three Righteous Mamas on it. And it's so soft. It feels like wearing cotton balls. And so I've worn it 2 days in a row because it just was so comfy. I'm probably going to have to wash it now, but you all should get one too.
I can't wait for mine to get here.
Well, thank you, Christina. And since wearing sweats and comfy clothes 24/7 is pandemic chic, we invite everyone to go hit up our store, which is store.threerighteousmamas.com with 3 the number, and order your gear now. And we'd love to see y'all. Share it on social media too with hashtag 3RighteousMamas. And with that said, today we'll be chatting with Raj Patel about food as justice.
For too long, history lessons have glossed over the truly essential contributions women have made to history. That's where Encyclopedia Womanica comes in. This podcast from Wonder Media Network aims to change the narrative by introducing the pioneers, scientists, artists, and more from antiquity to today who have shaped our society. Every weekday, host Jenny Kaplan dives into the trials, tragedies, and triumphs of this diverse group of groundbreaking women. And the best part is, each episode is only 5 minutes long. The bite-sized episodes pack painstakingly researched content into fun, entertaining, and addictive daily adventures. You may or may not already know these women, but you definitely should. Subscribe to Encyclopedia Womanica wherever you get your podcasts.
So we're really excited to be chatting with Raj Patel today. But first, y'all, I am super sick of being in my house with my cat as my coworker and my little kids, and I just keep dreaming about where I'm gonna go. Like, first I need to get this vaccine at some point. I'm trying to let all of the essential workers and the people on the front lines get it first, so I'm patiently waiting my turn. But I want to hear, Martha, Christina, where are y'all going? And I'm gonna make it even more exciting. Let's say money and all that stuff isn't an issue. Where do you want to go?
Just like a boundaryless dream trip.
Oh my God, it's what I think about like today. So today in Austin, it's 23 degrees or something outside. I'm absolutely freezing, and I keep thinking about where I'm going to go. So I've got a book, like a travel book behind me. I keep looking out for Vietnam.
Fun.
Well, travel aside, I would just want to go and like run and like hug everybody I see and be like that obnoxious person. And like I said, if money wasn't an issue, I think I just, you know, those places you see where it's like the Seychelles or Fiji, where it's like those huts that are like in the water and it's like a glass bottom hut, and then it's just blue waters, and part of the house has like a slide and you go down into the water. And then I just want to like, I don't know, just like float and then just scream.
I just pictured you doing that.
I did too. It's going to be good.
Awesome. Me, I actually already started planning because I've been obsessed. I'm like, I'm going to turn 40 in 2021 in January. And I'm hoping by then, maybe it's like too high of hope and aspiration, that I'm going to be able to travel freely. And I have asked my closest girlfriends, like, do you want to go to Vietnam with me? Girls trip. The history, the culture, the food. I've like planned everything out, where we're staying, what we're eating, what we're doing. It just like helps keep me sane in the being trapped, to remember there's other places around the world that don't revolve around the like 1,100 square feet of my house.
Yeah, there's a whole huge world out there. My family, like collectively, we are very, very excited to go to Japan at some point. So like, I don't know, during the pandemic, we've watched a ton of Japanese movies, kids movies, Totoro, and like all of these movies are now available on HBO Max, which if you haven't seen them, they are like, they're so amazingly good. But the kids are like obsessed with Japanese food, like everything about it. And I have a pen addiction, and there is a real, like, all of my pens and paper are Japanese right now. So we're like, I want to go there so badly. I can't wait. I can't even like, it's actually really hard for me to imagine a world where we all get on a plane and go somewhere.
This is the longest I've been since maybe I was 11 years old that I haven't gotten on a plane.
Same.
Because like for work, I used to get on a plane. God, there were time periods like once a week, you know?
Right.
So at least once a week. And now, and that's the part I do not miss. I hate airports. I hate like, there is something about standing in lines, like the line you get to get your ticket or drop off your luggage, the line then to get through the line, then you got to get in another line to get on the plane, and that stuff kills me. So I don't miss that, but just being able to dream about going somewhere there and then going would be amazing.
So if I was nice, I would indulge my husband and take him to go to Anfield Stadium, because my husband is a huge Liverpool fan. So for him to go and sing songs in the Cop and be part of all the crazy fan stuff and watch Liverpool play live and just go on sort of like a soccer tour, I think he would just lose it. I think that would make him happy, because, you know, as much as he's been stuck at home, like I think that would be like the most exciting thing for him. So anybody out there who has the Liverpool connection, feel free to hit us up. Or if you want to, you know, invite Christina to meet you in Vietnam, that's there.
That would be amazing.
And same for Japan. Martha's got your number. So we're excited to live in our travel dreams with y'all. And as far as world travel and food goes, I've been on this journey to learn more about food and its connections to justice, and we'll be talking to Raj Patel about that, and excited for y'all to be enlightened and ultimately have hope, because we're all in this conversation together.
Welcome everyone. We are so excited about our show today. We have Raj Patel, an award-winning author, filmmaker, and professor at the LBJ Public Policy School at the University of Texas at Austin. I've read numerous of his amazing books, including Stuffed and Starved, The Hidden Battle for the World Food System, and one of my all-time favorites, The Value of Nothing, How to Reshape Market Society and Redefine Democracy. And he's got an upcoming book, which you should get ready to buy, coming out later this year, called Inflamed, Deep Medicine and the Anatomy of Injustice. He also is co-host of an incredible podcast about food politics and justice called The Secret Ingredient. So go subscribe and download. And you can follow him at Twitter at _Raj Patel. So we're going to be talking to Raj about how food is part of the justice work that we do and build a better world for all our kids. It's really great to have you, Raj. This is my second time introducing you. I don't know if you remember years ago when you and I were younger, right. I introduced you at an event for your book, Stuffed and Starved. So it's, you know, full circle now. But we always start off talking to our guests about their mamas or a maternal figure that shaped who they are. And for people that don't know you, you're one of my favorite people because you're incredibly funny, really smart, and I want to know who made you that way.
Oh, good God. Well, first of all, thank you, all three of you, for inviting me. I'm deeply grateful. I'm honored to be here. And I owe it all to my mum. Well, I mean, look, my dad is an entertainer and a people pleaser, and you know, he can hold a crowd with the same joke. I mean, he's been telling really just one joke for most of his life, and it's still funny. You know, and it's just about how he's. I mean, we grew up in a convenience store, so he was. I mean, the business about convenience stores is all about making. You know, trying to do side deals and hustles, but he was the only Indian in a world of cowboys. Was his gag, and when I do it, it just dies. But when he does it, it's brilliant. And my mum, on the other hand, is just sort of is righteous and fabulous, and knows justice, you know, to a T. And she has never, you know, I mean, she's just steadfast, and if any of that's rubbed off on me, I am incredibly grateful.
So, and what's your mom's name? Where does she live? I know you've lived all different kinds of places.
Yeah, so my mom's name is Pratima, and she grew up in Kenya, and then found her way to the colonial metropole in London, where she met my dad. So she's now living there, and yeah. You know, locked down and surviving the particularly nasty British variant of COVID at the moment.
Well, I hope she's okay.
We're hanging in there.
Raj, thank you for telling us about Pratimaji, and we'd like to chat with you a little bit about your expertise. And so, before we get started, we're in the middle of a pandemic. We're facing climate change. We're in the middle of a recession. There are all sorts of things on the list of troubles. We want to talk to you about food justice, but can you sort of set the stage for us? Why should people care when there's this dearth of other things sort of competing for our interest?
Thank you, Muna. I mean, there are lots of different ways to get into justice. So for me, it was always a deeply personal thing. You know, I was 5 and in the land of my ancestors in India when, for the first time, I was confronted by extreme poverty. And it was a girl who had an infant in her hands. And I was sitting inside a car and the rain was hammering down on the roof. And she was just knocking on the window, just asking for a rupee or, you know, just a tiny bit of money. And I lost my shit. I was wailing and screaming and crying, and I didn't understand why, you know, she was hungry and we weren't, and why we had money and she didn't, and she was wet and we were dry. And so in the end, you know, my parents sort of cracked down the window and pressed out some cash, and away we sped. But when I came back to Britain, I started renting out my toys to raise money for hunger relief. And for me, it's always been that, you know, it's been hunger and food that's always been the way into thinking about justice, about poverty, about, you know, patriarchy and inequality and imperialism and all. You know, I mean, I started doing the fundraising stuff, but you know, food is one of these things where you start pulling the thread, and all of a sudden you end up with much deeper ideas about, well, hang on, whose land is this? And how is it that we got here? And whose labor went into this? And why is it that they're dying and they've got, you know, incredibly low wages, if any, and we are able to choose whatever we like from the supermarket shelf? So for me, I mean, obviously, you know, people are moved by different experiences in their lives to follow certain paths. But for me, food has been an exploration into the world of justice and what's fair and what isn't. I don't know, Muna, does that answer your question?
It does. I'm thinking, I'm still on that sort of visual of the girl holding an infant in the rain, because I'm also Indian and I've had that experience so many times. And you can't hear me?
No, I can hear you.
Okay, I didn't want to keep going. Let me get closer to the mic here. Okay, so what I was saying is that visual with the beggar girl and the infant, it's very emotional for me, because I think about that a lot. My father does a lot of work in a nonprofit industry, and I think traditionally a lot of folks will approach these issues through philanthropy and helping, but you said when we pull the thread, everything under it comes out. And that really hit me hard, because I don't want to be treating the symptoms or the things above the waterline, if you will. I want to understand where the root of issues are to be fixing them. And so I really want to dig in more on that, and I'm looking forward to the conversation. Yeah. I'm newer to this conversation than Martha and Christina.
Raj, I really feel you on the food being the thing that led you to justice. It is the same that led me to justice. And I'm interested. We were talking briefly before we kicked off the podcast about a 10-year documentary that you've been working on, where lessons that you've been learning from people in Malawi are being exported or brought here, imported to the US. I would love to hear more about what you've seen globally that we can apply locally, because what you describe as seeing as a kid with the woman asking for rupees, my kids see every day on the streets in Austin, Texas. And they are as moved and offended by it as they should be, as we should all be. And so I'm curious what you see.
Well, I'll trade you, Mother. I mean, if you might be able to share a little bit about how food got you into thinking about justice, I'd love to hear that, because I'm always fascinated by the solidarities that we can weave through that engagement. For me, the story of this documentary project is really about how it is that we can imagine fixes to big problems. I mean, if we're thinking about films on social change and documentaries about social change, there are a few that touch on the world of food that are, I mean, they're disappointing, to say the least. I mean, it's something like Food Inc., for example, was big, more than a decade ago now, and the idea there was, here are some people of color in America and they are suffering because they have diabetes, and isn't that sad? And then here's some hunger, and here's some farmers who are up against it and trying to grow organic, and therefore the solution is for us to go to Walmart and buy organic yogurt, which I think is a fair summary of the arc of that film as it now stands.
I think you got it.
But what you never see is, first of all, the kind of change that's not just about, we need to shop differently, because that at some level, that's to buy into that ethical consumerism is already to have surrendered the thing that makes us most powerful. We become powerful not when we shop, but when we realize we're more powerful than the mere consumers. We are comrades. We are in solidarity with one another, and movements change the world, not shopping. So figuring out how to get that bigger picture story told in a way that people would listen was really hard. And so I turned to Steve James, who's the guy who did Hoop Dreams. And he is a master filmmaker. I mean, he's able to make a movie about basketball, which my in-laws from Punjab watched, and it was 2 hours and 45 minutes is Hoop Dreams, and they were riveted from the get-go. Now, the way you make something about basketball in Chicago interesting to people halfway around the world is through storytelling, through characters who sees you, and all of a sudden you become invested in their lives, and you don't really, the basketball's a secondary thing. So Steve came with me to Malawi, where I'd been working for a little while with Rachel Besner-Kerr and her team, a group called Soils, Food and Healthy Communities. And if you go to soilandfood.org, you can see some of the work they're doing there. So what we saw was that rather than doing small tweaks to be able to end big problems, you have to do big things. So they realized we have to transform the way we farm. We can't just farm organically. We have to farm agroecologically. We have to grow corn and beans and squash, the three sisters of the Mesoamerican crop system. And you grow corn because it's the cereal that everyone loves. And you grow beans because they fix nitrogen in the soil, plus you get the protein. And you get squash, which are big fat leaves that give you, squash, they shade out the weeds. The squash blossom attracts the beneficial insect. It's fantastic. So, they have this agroecological system, but they also have a social system, because they realize, look, we can grow all the food we like, but if it's also women's work to cook and clean and fetch firewood and breastfeed and all the rest of it, then agroecology is labor intensive. Then women will be doing way more work, and you can have rates of hunger going up. You can have malnutrition increasing because women don't have time to breastfeed. So they said, all right, fine, we're going to take this on. We're going to end patriarchy in our village, and that's the only way we will end hunger. And I say this, and people are like, no, don't be stupid. You can't do that. That's too big. You're ending hunger and patriarchy. It's two different things, and they're both huge, and you can't possibly do that. Why don't we just buy organic yogurt? That's easier. And the fact is that by watching these community organizers transform social relationships over time, you can show that this actually happens. And so over the course of the film, we witness this transformation in a particular couple, and we witness our chief organizer Anita Chitaya really doing amazing things. And then she turned to us one day, and we were talking about climate change. She goes, I understand. I've come to learn that America is the place where climate change is. People don't believe in climate change. We believe in it here. We see it every day, and it really affects us as women because we're the ones who have to go out and get extra water, and we have to, the seasons, the burdens of the seasons are still upon us, even though we're eradicating patriarchy. It's still not a done deal. Can I come to America and persuade Americans that climate change is real? So halfway through our film, Anita's request transformed the way we behaved, so that she became a collaborator and a co-producer in the film, shaping the narrative, shaping the narration, and also shaping our interactions with communities. I mean, we had fantastic engagements in Detroit and in Oakland, California, but also in the Midwest with climate change skeptics, mainly white Christian climate change skeptics who were fans of the former president, and who had, who struggled with the idea that climate change and patriarchy were bad things.
Raj, I'm curious, as you were talking about this documentary, and you said that we started with looking at, was it
agroecology? I'm sorry, yes.
Agroecology. And then you moved into solving patriarchy and misogyny, and these are really big problems to solve. And as I was listening to you, I thought, why do we limit ourselves on the problems? Like, why do we have these boxes we put ourselves into that are so short term in solving problems? And what caused y'all, or how did you have the permission to go bigger? I'm so fascinated by this, because I think this is something children naturally do, and then as parents we rein them in, and I can't, I want to stop doing that to myself and to others.
I mean, what I saw, and this is really about the movement, the Soils, Food and Healthy Communities organization, they essentially became runaway scientists, where the way the government was teaching them to farm was the way that most farming happens in America, which is industrial agriculture. And what that is using lots of chemistry, lots of fertilizers, only growing one crop, and then selling it and using that money to buy whatever it is that you need. But the seasons weren't working. The price of the seeds and the price of the fertilizer and the pesticides, all of that was going up, and the returns weren't worth it. So and in particular, this project was driven by the needs of the poorest people, who are usually widows looking after AIDS orphans. And it began in the early 2000s, where the scourge of the HIV/AIDS epidemic in Malawi was particularly bad. And those women needed not to grow corn, but they needed fresh fruits and vegetables. They needed nutritious food because they couldn't really afford to buy anything in the market. So they became scientists trying to figure out, well, what grows well with what? How do we put these two things together, or three things, to see how we can get the most nutritious food? But once they were given that permission not to do what the government told them, or do what the man from Monsanto or the private sector told them, it was just weapons free. I mean, it was you could do whatever. Well, why aren't we asking this question? Why aren't we asking this question? Why do we believe that this cannot be solved when it's obviously the problem? And by having this sort of social process of science, so it's not just lone scientist in the lab suddenly discovers at midnight, and just with a light shining on one white coated dude hunched over a microscope. But no, the way the science work is always a social experiment. And so everyone gets together and swaps seeds and says, well, this is working for me. Why do you think that was? And that social, when you have the infrastructure for social inquiry like that, where everyone's a scientist and everyone's hunched over the results, trying to figure it out, that kind of framework allows other questions to be asked. And so, in fact, one of the interesting things about science in the West and the global North is that there's always a a billion people on a scientific paper, there's always the lead author, and everyone calls it, the X experiment, where X is whoever, whatever famous scientist. No one has their name attached to any of this in Malawi and I asked, well, who came up with the idea? For example, there's a brilliant idea called a recipe day, where women and men get together and kids, and everyone teaches each other how to cook. And this way, it becomes normal for men to be doing things with their bodies and cooking that are really prohibited ordinarily. And these recipe days are fantastic because you can do whatever you like, and it's fun and it's joyful. And afterwards, men continue to cook because there's follow-up organizing. And I was like, well, this is fantastic. Who came up with this? And people don't know. There was, it happened at a meeting. I don't remember whose idea it was. It doesn't matter. It's not relevant. And that was funnily one of the things that community organizers here in America said. It's like, the donors make us try to ascribe responsibility. It was like X's idea or Y's idea, but no, in a community organizing moment, it's everyone's idea and no one claims responsibility. It's an experiment. We'll see if it works or not.
I love that. I also, it was making me think when you said, doing recipe day and breaking down kind of the gender barriers of who cooks. There's a saying in Spanish, "Ya estás listo para casarte," you're ready to get married. And usually it's told to women that they're ready to marry because they cook well or they clean well. And so I always tell Santi, like if he's helping me clean, I say, "Ya estás listo para casarte, Santi. You know how to cook." Trying to break it down even when they're really little. But, I wanted to ask you a little bit about like the history of how food is here in this country. I remember when my mom came to the United States from Mexico, her family were mostly subsistence farmers. They ate beans, squash, tortillas, right? Corn. And then she came to this country and she couldn't believe how cheap fast food was. And she at first was like really excited. And so she ate it. And then she just didn't like how it made her feel. So we have this weird thing in this country where bad food is cheaper oftentimes than the good healthy food. And you've written about the real cost of our food system, the cost to our bodies that isn't calculated, the cost to our planet that isn't calculated, and the cost to the people who produce our food, and how that really isn't built in. So like, how did we get to this place where a Big Mac can be so much cheaper than fresh fruits and vegetables that are so much healthier?
Well, Christina, I mean, here we are on stolen land, all of us, right? We're asking the question, well, how comes it's so cheap? Well, this country was founded on the theft of land and labor. This is stolen land, and it was founded as a country where enslaved populations from initially indigenous and then mainly from Africa made this country what it is, and that hasn't gone away. The identities certainly have changed, and some of the regulations have changed. But in some cases, they really haven't. I mean, in a book that I co-authored with a friend, Jason Moore, we talk about the history of the world in 7 cheap things, and the example that we use is the chicken nugget. The chicken nugget is the most capitalist object because, in millennia from now, not millennia, eons from now, if there's any intelligence after us, so they look in the fossil record, they will find billions of chicken bones because we go through 50 billion chickens a year. So trillions of chicken bones is what they'll find in the fossil record. Now, how did this cheap nugget get to where it was? Well, yeah, theft of land and lots of energy going into it, lots of cheap credit. But then we talk about the labor and the workers who are on the front lines of the slaughterhouses. Well, we know in Texas, they're the ones who are also considered disposable, both essential and disposable, because that's how attitudes to the working class are under COVID, right? Where it's like, oh yeah, well done, thanks so much for working for minimum wage for us, and here's a slaughterhouse for you to work in, and no, there aren't any protections, but good luck to you. Because you are an essential worker, and it was prisons and slaughterhouses in Texas that were really some of the early hotspots, and now it's nursing homes, which is also for a future conversation, but very similar, structurally allied. But the story of cheap chicken nuggets is also a story about In some cases, labor that looks very much like the original labor with which original labor arrangements with which this continent was colonized. There's something called the Christian Alcoholics and Addicts in Recovery in Oklahoma, and it was set up by some chicken executives. And what they realize is, look, there's an opioid epidemic caused by the Sackler family, and then there's also a problem of us not having cheap enough workers on the chicken production line. So let's kill two birds with one stone, as it were, and we're going to have a recovery center, so people who are diverted from prison with addiction-related issues can come to us, and by day they will pray to the good Lord Jesus, and by night they will work for free as part of their rehabilitation on the chicken production line. And that will be, at some point they will be released from their service as rehabilitated individuals who have seen the light of God. But that's exactly the same kind of labor arrangement that the Spanish had when they first colonized the New World, right? It was initially indigenous people enslaved for generations, and they would be forced to work during the day, and by night they would pray to the good Lord Jesus for salvation. But it's very, very weird to find the exact echo of the original arrangements of enslavement that obtained in the first moments of colonization of the Western Hemisphere, happening again in the chicken industry. But the reason our food is so cheap is because we don't pay workers enough. 7 out of the 10 worst paying jobs in America are in the food system, and we don't care very much about the consequences for the rest of the web of life. So if there's pollution, someone else deals with that. The dead zone in the Gulf of New Mexico this year was pretty bad, but amid the pandemic, no one paid attention to it. But this is the way we work. We treat nature as an infinite resource and trash can, and we treat workers, particularly workers of color, as infinitely disposable, and we treat the communities that they come from as having infinite resources of care, so that when workers' bodies are broken, it is the communities, usually the women in those communities, who will pick up the pieces, because that's what's expected.
If you're looking for great book recommendations, you should check out Zibby Owens. She is all things literary. Listen to her award-winning podcast, Moms Don't Have Time to Read Books, 5 times a week, with amazing guests like Chelsea Clinton, Alicia Keys, Natalie Portman, and more. Zibby's podcast, Moms Don't Have Time to Read Books, has been on Oprah's list of best book podcasts 2 years in a row. Zibby has a newly released anthology, Moms Don't Have Time to Quarantine Anthology, which comes out February 16th and includes 60 essays from best-selling and notable authors who have been on her podcast, writing on these 5 things moms don't have time to do: read, eat, work out, breathe, and have sex. Hear from Gretchen Rubin, Evangeline Lilly, Chris Bohagen, and many others. All proceeds go to the Susan Fellis Owens Program for COVID-19 vaccine research at Mount Sinai Medical Center, named after Zibby's late mother-in-law. Go to zibbyowens.com and see why Zibby has been called NYC's most important book influencer by Vulture, and follow her on Instagram at Zibby Owens and at Moms Don't Have Time to Read Books! ! There's so much there in what you just talked about the workers who produce our food, their conditions, the environmental cost, and how we all don't calculate it. And of course, we didn't even talk about like the massive subsidies that go in this country for certain kinds of agricultural crops. But I also wanted to ask you, I love what you do. You think about locally and then how it relates globally, right? And especially with the food that we consume in this country. But not only do we, import food from other places, sometimes we also export our ideas in this country that then cause a lot of friction and pain for people in other parts of the globe. And I remember being 10 years old, and I remember NAFTA was going to be passed, and my dad said he was against it. And I said, why? And he said, because in Mexico, they're just going to all end up eating. And he tried to explain it to me as a 10-year-old. So he said, they're not going to eat tortillas anymore. They're all going to eat bread. But, what ended up happening did end up causing so much migration that reshaped, especially the state that we're in here in Texas. I know you've done work for the World Trade Organization and the World Bank that's driven sometimes policies that have impacted the global food supply and then impacted migration. can you explain to folks, walk through that story a little bit more about, one food product that you've seen and how it's really shifted when we've imported our ideas or exported our ideas about how food systems should work to other places and disrupted communities?
Well, thank you, Christina, for pointing out that, yes, I was very briefly an employee of the World Bank, and then I interned at the World Trade Organization. I have to say, both occasions, I was trying to do it as an insider, trying to figure out, well, how are these organizations so powerful? How do they work? How do they export their ideas? And in part, it's because at the World Trade Organization, they often have countries in the global south over a barrel. So I was part of some protests in Seattle in 1999, where I was both on the outside reporting for indie media and also inside as part of the Zimbabwean trade delegation. And so I got to see how these ideas are imposed. And the way they're imposed is the US tells you what to do and says, if you don't do what you want us to, there will be sanctions on you as a country, and also on the aid regime that you've gotten used to is going to be yanked away from you. And that's that's the fairly sort of naked reflection of the way the US power operates in these economic institutions. But there's also the subtle way of just saying, well, pick off the right kinds of people and educate them in the right kinds of way, and you can get them to shackle their own hands. And NAFTA, oddly, was an example of that. In the negotiations of NAFTA, the US never wanted to have agriculture as part of the NAFTA project, because the US understood pretty well that US farmers were not going to give up their subsidies, and they're not going to be made to give up their subsidies. And it was a Mexican elite, an urban elite, that embraced the idea of having corn, for example, be subsidized in the United States and imported to Mexico, so that campesinos would basically give up farming, move to the city, and start getting work as workers in factories. And that would drive the economy forward. And that kind of thinking, although it originates in the global north, and it originates in the sort of institutes of mediocre economics that run and feed into the World Bank, it was also embraced by the elite in Mexico, because they quite like the idea of modernizing the economy by forcing campesinos, who've always been restive and troublesome, off their land and into the cities where they might be more adequately controlled. So you've got that history, and the upshot of it is exactly as your dad foresaw. That not only is the consumption of bread up, but also the sorts of things that US marketing is able to do, and in particular, consumption of soda is up. Until recently, Mexico was the place in the world that consumed the most soda per capita, and that happened as a direct consequence of NAFTA. And it was the case for a while that the closer you got to the US border, the more likely you were to find Mexican teenagers who are overweight and pre-diabetic, because of the marketing that was just coming basically in waves across the border. And it's only been recently that there's been some really good organizing in Mexico, leading the world to push back on Pepsi and Coke in particular. But what do you expect in a country where one of the former one of the former presidents was a Coke executive? I mean, Vicente Fox was bought and paid for by Coke, right?
Right, bought and paid for in the food system, and all that's done for our health, or done in opposition of our health, I think is one of the things that really got my wheels spinning about food. So my story is that I actually went to culinary school when I was 30 and started cooking professionally. And until that moment, I did not think a lot about food. I didn't think a ton about where it came from or the consequences of it. But the minute I started cooking it, I had a different connection with it. And I got really curious about okay, so how was this animal treated? How did this plant get here? Who picked it? How were they treated? And why do we live in a country where simultaneously hunger is exploding and obesity is exploding, and but how do we start to pull out of this place where our tax dollars, our literal tax dollars that we pay to our government, go to support food that makes us sick instead of food that makes us well, in a system where we've never paid the full cost of food ever in the existence of our food system. Have we paid the full price?
No, I mean, you put your finger on so much there. I mean, and thank you so much for that, Martha. I mean, for me, the hard part is figuring out how, which organizations. Let me take a step back. You're absolutely right that in fact, I mean, for me, comes that there are lots of different pathways that people have taken. For workers, organizing, I mean, the history of the United States doing the right thing occasionally is always a history of workers forcing the United States to do the right thing. Right? Yeah. It's never, the US never willingly does anything right unless it is forced to by movements like the Civil Rights Movement or the Women's Rights Movement or, the workers in the 1920s and 30s. So those kinds of organizations, unions, I'm a big fan of. I think that there are ways that even in Texas, it is possible to have a union movement that is visionary and is ready to embrace things like the Green New Deal. But the other path through this is, as you noted, through health. So many people come to understand that the way we eat is poisoning us by just looking at us and our families, right? Looking at the kinds of things that our families are struggling with. The inflammation idea that my comrade Rupa Maria and I are exploring in this book later on this year is a way of saying, well, look, do you have asthma or eczema or some sort of inflammatory disease? Are you noticing, inflammatory bowel disease? Are you noticing your body is changing over time in ways that just don't feel consonant with the rest of the world around you? That's related to the food system, but it's also related to the stress of living in a patriarchal world and a white supremacist world, and
biodiversity.
Exactly. So in order to bring that biodiversity back, there are a couple of ways to go. One is the individualist way, which is, I'm going to pop, a biodiversity in a pill. I'm going to get my probiotics and all of a sudden biodiversity will return to me. But that's no good. I mean, surely the collective way of demanding health, taking to the streets and demanding, to basically say that Black Lives Matter, for example, is a health demand as much as it is a demand about dignity and about just the intrinsic worth of life. But those kinds of movements. I'm pleased that the Red Deal, for example, and the movement of Black Lives and the Green New Deal all seem to agree that there's an important space to think about health and about housing and around our food system and about water and biodiversity, because they're all connected. And I think the interesting question then is, where do we decide that we want to join this movement? Because there are so many parts to it. And for me, I'm excited about some of the labor stuff and some of the farmers and farm worker movements that are happening. But there are so many, everything from animal rights to the Union of Concerned Scientists. I mean, there are so many organizations that are working on this new food policy for America, and I'm kind of excited to be a part of that.
One thing I'm curious about is if we don't. I am curious if we orient. If we orient to universal healthcare and we start to bear the cost of our disease, I wonder if that doesn't then incent us to build something healthier for the people.
Well, you're right. In the UK, for example, where there is universal healthcare, there's been much more aggressive policing of foods that are obesogenic. So just foods that are high in empty calories, and so those tend to be have fallen out of favor in schools and are being sort of marketed against more prolifically. But the fact is that the companies that push these food products are insanely powerful, and they are part of they know the damage that they're doing, by the way. I had a conversation with the head of sustainability at Nestle, and he said that basically for every Mars bar or Snickers bar, whatever it is that you buy, the environmental footprint of that is, in terms of ratios to revenue to to cost is 224%. So you'd have to buy 2 Mars bars to offset the environmental damage caused by 1 Mars bar. They know that they're doing that, and that's common knowledge. And that's just the environmental side. The healthcare costs don't feature, the workers' lives don't matter in that equation. But they do it anyway, and they get away with it. And so I think switching to universal healthcare is just dignified for so many reasons, but it's not going to be enough. We're going to have to take these corporations on fairly directly.
Game on.
I'm hearing a lot of your hope and excitement, and at the same time, I'm sitting here feeling sort of this profound sense of loss and maybe a little bit of rage. These are things that I think I knew, but I didn't quite connect the dots in the same way. And like, I'm struck by kind of this sense of arrogance that modernity is so important, and that, you know, we have these answers. And I think about, like, for example, when I was younger, seeing folks who were giving their kids formula instead of breast milk. Well, because it came from America, it must be better. And their kids suffered over it. And I think we still see this. And so there's this push to go back to breast milk, for example, or even here in the US with these forest fires that are burning. And then you see these articles about how, well, the Native Americans used to do controlled brush fires to clear out the undergrowth and prepare the land in a certain way. And that was outlawed. And it set the stage for these forest fires to continue. And so those are 2 examples that come up for me just off the top of my head. And I sit there and I think, like, how would things be different if this colonial, imperial way of being in the world hadn't happened, and if we were eating the foods that our traditions and our indigenous people were, because there was a way of life before, right? And I don't know, like the example you gave in Malawi, where they discovered these 3 types of food that are grown together survive well, but like, was that what the traditional foods were that were grown there before? Is that what they're finding now? And I guess I don't necessarily have a question, except that, like, I'm feeling the loss, or maybe my question is like, what's giving you the hope, I guess, because I really do hear it, that you're like excited about certain things and you're seeing movement.
Well, thank you, Bruno. I mean, you know, I feel the same things that you do. I feel rage at the fact that these bastards get away with it. I feel grief. I mean, we're all feeling grief. I mean, this is the season for it, isn't it? I mean, you know, we've all lost people, and we've all been particularly frustrated at not being able to just reach out and hold folk in this moment. And I mean. All of that weighs all of us down, and it's hard. But I mean, when you think about the folk who are on the front lines doing this, and you know, fighting the fight in these movements, for me, it would be wrong to wallow in it. I mean, it's not wallowing just to experience the grief, and it's not wallowing to experience the rage and the anger and the feeling of injustice, but it would also not serve the movement. And it would, in my, you know, I mean, I feel like, look, I look at the data around climate change. I look at how powerful these corporations are, and you extrapolate the trend lines, and things are not looking good. And if I were to let that shape my psychology about the possibilities of change, I would be incredibly depressed and pessimistic. And then, you know, people like Anita Chitaya, for example, at the Soil, Food and Healthy Communities Initiative, gets up every day and fights, not in the Trump way, but just in the way. And that kind of, it would be a betrayal of her not to recognize that. And so, you know, it's hard to make her do one more thing, but one thing she does do is inspire me. And I mean, it's super interesting to look, for example, at peasant movements. And this is another way of getting at your observation, Muna, about how, you know, tradition might be, going back and imagining a sort of a pre-colonial time is important. there's definitely lessons, pre-colonial lessons to take. So this Three Sisters kind of agriculture is actually a Mesoamerican one. It has nothing to do with Malawi. And some of the crops that, I mean, corn is not, corn's a Western Hemisphere crop. It only comes to Malawi through colonialism. But the knowledge about growing these Three Sisters together is indigenous Mesoamerican knowledge, and it's ancient indigenous knowledge, and it's iterated and it's improved. And one of the things that I like about the movements that I'm engaged with are that they're very happy to exchange and not be confined by, oh, well, this is only Malawian, so we can only do that. But very ready to exchange and learn and to have this vast world of biodiversity. And they're also ready to take pot shots at what was pretty crappy in tradition, particularly around patriarchy. So family farms, for example, are inherently patriarchal institutions. And so when we think about, oh, yes, we must have more family farms in America, corporate farms are bad, family farms good, it's important to remember, no, well, the family can be a horrible institution of patriarchy and of violence. And one of the things about the international peasant movement, La Via Campesina, which has 200 million members, what I love about their approach to food systems change was, initially they're like, oh yeah, we need more local control over our food system. But in the end, they realized, look, you can only have local control when there's gender equality. And so you have a bunch of peasants, and peasant is this word that we throw around like someone from the 1800s who happens to have survived by magic into the 21st century. But peasants are demanding gender equality. And in that way represent a very 21st century idea about how power works that isn't about, oh, well, we must go back to some horrible exploitative system. But what they want is a farming system that's based on equality, not just between humans, but between humans and the rest of the web of life. I mean, what's not to be inspired by there? So I'm with you in thinking that there's lots to learn from different traditions, and it's important to learn them without stealing them, because again, the theft of indigenous knowledge is just that's another thing that's rife in the food system. But it's also some of these movements have really committed to the idea that when exchange happens, it should happen between equals and not over relations of domination. And I have to be inspired by that even in these dark moments.
If there's nothing else that is righteous, it's this value system of equality and respect and compassion and learning. And I love that you're sharing that. The last call we had, we talked to Alicia about, including everyone in the conversation. And you said something earlier around, we have to be in solidarity with each other. And I think that's just completely in line with what the conversations we're trying to have here as Righteous Mamas. And so what are your thoughts? How do we make healthy food that's accessible for everyone, right? Right now, we're not paying the full cost of that food. It requires change, but I would love to have that healthy food accessible for everyone.
The only way that we can have that food accessible for everyone is for everyone to be able to afford it. And that means, again, raising wages, particularly for food service workers. But, this is about a transformation in the way that we value work. And that means valuing unpaid work, which is predominantly women's unpaid work. It means recognizing the work of food system workers, particularly migrant workers, who are invariably underpaid and exploited in this country. But if this is the paradox everywhere around the world, that if you look at who's going hungry globally, it's invariably farm workers and farm working communities, because they are the people who are paid the worst almost everywhere. And the reason we have hunger and the reason we have obesity is, the same kinds of vectors of poverty. If you are on a low income and can't afford to eat, you starve. And if you're on a low income and you can afford to eat, then you eat what's mass marketed and available near you. And that's, these obesogenic, high calorie, low nutrient foods. So if we're interested in turning that around, then absolutely income is part of the problem. And that means addressing, to get us back to Christina, your question. I mean, addressing the very problem of what this country was founded on. This country was founded on cheap food, of exploited labor and stolen land. undoing that is to undo America. And this is, I wonder if we can talk just for a second about the sort of immigrant angle here, where, I mean, certainly when so many immigrants come to America, the other thing that they notice is that meat is cheap, like crazy cheap, way cheaper than anywhere else in the world. It's batshit crazy cheap. It's like, and so Americans eat so much meat. And it's really interesting to me that, when you try and suggest a transformation in the way that America eats and cares for, all Americans and making sure that everyone gets to eat, eating less meat is going to be part of that equation. I just want to grasp that nettle, because if we are going to have a future planet, then we're going to have to eat in a way that everyone gets to eat the same quality of food. And that means for Americans eating much less meat. I struggle because to attack Americans' meat eating is to attack America, and that's fine. I think patriotism is bullshit, and I think that the idea of any particular country is usually an impressive one, but the problem with attacking meat is that it is an attack on identity, and so many folks' idea of what it is to be in this country and to live in the land of opportunity. And it's only through, actually sort of on the ground work with, for example, the United Food and Commercial Workers Union is working with slaughterhouse workers to imagine them transitioning out of meat manufacturing into sustainable fresh fruits and vegetable growing that's union run and cooperatively owned. Those kinds of transformations I'm excited about. But again, that's about raising wages so everyone gets to eat, but everyone gets to eat stuff that's healthy, and that means giving up on on certain things, and to experience that as a liberation. It's like giving up patriarchy is not a bad thing; it's a good thing. Giving up meat should be understood similarly. It's not a privation to cede this particular excessive domination of life. Sure, there are agroecological systems that require some animals. I'm not saying don't, zero animals anywhere, but I am saying that we radically have to rethink that. And I think that that's okay. We can raise our children to eat better and to care for the web of life more, and for the workers who are in it, and for the soil beneath our feet, in ways that can feel like they are of this land. In ways that our current food system doesn't feel like it's of this land. It feels like it's of a stolen country.
It is of a stolen country, and it's in packaging that removes it so far from the violence attached to it that it makes it really easy to just consume. But so we always like to sort of end by bringing this into our homes. How do we bring this work into our homes? And I wonder if you could, eating less meat is a great place to start. And I think also being curious about where meat comes from is a particularly important journey. But what else can our listeners do? What can we do to bring this conversation into our homes and practice it with our kids and our families?
If you're lucky enough to have green space that you can grow something on, that is, I love doing that with my kids. In fact, I was cycling around with my daughter, and we were throwing seed bombs, trying to get food to grow where it shouldn't. And that's just, just an act of anarchy that is important. It's important to break a law every day, just to remind yourself that there'll come a time where we'll need to break a whole lot of them if we are to retain our dignity. And so just keeping in check, keeping in practice in terms of transgressing some of the obviously bad laws that prevent life from spreading and from people from caring for one another. That's a good idea. Volunteering. It's hard right now to volunteer with kids at the food bank. I've seen a few on some a shift I did there a while back. There were some teenagers, and it's good to see that kind of recognition of folk just giving time to those who are struggling right now, of whom there are so many, particularly in this state. But if you're able just to get your hands in the soil every day as well. I mean, right now the soil's frozen solid as we're in the cold snap. But actually, there are lots of reasons that I've come to really value the hands in the ground, and in part it's because it's just healthy. But increasingly, it's also part of a practice that I'm trying to develop around gratitude for the fact that I am on stolen land, and a reminder every day that there is a web of life here that I'm a part of, that I'm accountable to, and that I need to do something with, and just to be able to have small practices that connect me to this place and remind me that this place is strange and has layers in it that are, that are layers of injustice that I am responsible in part for undoing and participating in. So I have to be responsible in undoing it. I think you can do that wherever you are, because wherever you are, you're on stolen land. Recognizing that, I think, is the first step in an uncomfortable conversation about reparations that needs to happen, in this city, in this state, in this country. But that's the sort of thing that when I talk to my kids about it, there's like, oh my God, and away they go, and they're historians and they're economists and they're botanists, and all of a sudden the idea that we're on stolen land, but this land is alive and carries memory and carries tradition and carries ideas, is it's a way to reconnect us to one another and to the web of life that lives underneath us.
That is beautiful. I love it. Raj, thank you so much for spending this evening with us. And I have to say that I love your enthusiasm for the work that you do. And, food is essential. The work that you're doing is essential until everybody has access to the kind of food that will allow them to thrive and embrace health. We haven't finished the work, and we all have that work to do together. And I just really appreciate you.
I'm so grateful. Thank you. Thank you for the honor of being on the show, and I'm excited to share more ideas with you, particularly when Rupa and I have this book coming out. We'll be sure to send it along.
I really want to hear about that too.
I loved the conversation with Raj. I remember meeting him years ago. For me, actually, I came to a lot of the things I care about through food as well. And I definitely, the joke is like, how do you know if someone's vegan? Don't worry, they'll tell you, because we're an obnoxious bunch. But I have been vegan since I was 16, so 23 years. I definitely am not one of those people that believes everybody needs to be vegan at all. I do not believe that. I think people can eat meat if they want to. But for me, the choice to be vegan was because I just consume less water, I consume less land, that I can choose to not consume all kinds of things, but at the end of the day, I have to eat every day. And so I wanted to try and do that in my own way, where I felt like I was doing it with the greatest care possible in the world. And so 16-year-old me, that's how I made that choice. And, I think there's all different kinds of ways for people to do it. Like, I don't think there's any one size fits all. But I definitely do think when we think about justice for our kids and building a better world for them, I want them to have healthy, great food and have healthy communities. And so much of that is what we put into our bodies and into our little people. And so the great thing about this is that there's things that people can do right now. And I want folks to know that are listening, like, we don't expect every person at Three Righteous Mamas to solve every problem in the world, but there's just small things we can do that make a really big difference. And so I really appreciate Raj opening listeners' ears and eyes to the possibilities around creating a more just world through what we eat.
Copy that. I totally agree. It's funny because when I started, this made me think of it, but when I started the Hot Dang, which is the vegetarian burger I started almost 10 years ago, I kept thinking that, like, what if every burger of Hot Dang that sold meant one burger from a feedlot that didn't happen. And so that was really like one of my main passionate drivers, was to start to shift the load from a system that is unhealthy for so many reasons and for so many people, to something that was recognizable and that also fostered healthy growth and agriculture, because it's the diversity question goes so much deeper than just social diversity, than community diversity, but like diversity is critical for healthy life in our very guts, like in the flora, in the lining of our stomach. It is in our soil. It is critical ingredient to health, and it is a critical ingredient to our social health. And so there is so much in food and so much possibility in the way that we engage around food, that I just love it the most. It's where community happens, around kitchen tables, when we're not in a pandemic. And I can't wait not to be in a pandemic and make these conversations happen around a kitchen table.
I'm struck by so many things that Raj said. First, even right now in this moment of pandemic, where we have people who are essential and disposable at the same time, and we only realize it because in this instance it impacted us because of the pandemic, and we need these folks who are working at meat plants, even though that's one of the worst places where outbreaks have been affecting people, and they still have to show up and stand shoulder to shoulder and wear their adult diapers because they're not given breaks, right? And then delivery drivers and whatnot, and in the entire chain. And these people are resources that are not infinite, and I don't want to be part of, consuming something where I don't see the cost, and the cost is passed on to someone else. And so, Christina, I like what you were talking about, where it's like there are things we can be doing right now to be aware and change how we eat. And it is so easy to pass the cost on to someone else. And I think it's become part and parcel of how we live. Almost everything we do, whether it's buying clothes or the way we shop or whatever, there is a cost that is passed on to someone else, somewhere else. It makes me think, I remember when I first started working at Indeed, they only have compostable plates and not plates, like spoons and forks and napkins and cups. And like, we only have like glass plates. And I just thought that's so cool. But then I realized, okay, like they drew a line in the sand. They were like, we're going to pick up the cost of this because we don't want to pass on the cost of garbage to someone else. And like, going to second point of like, what does the world look like when we start to think big and we're the owners and drivers of solving our own problems, right? And I think that's a really cool way of trying to think about things and not be limited or inhibited by artificial structures, right? And building that practice. And we are more than consumers, and being in solidarity with each other. And I think that's the thing I take away the most. I have felt so much Raj's hope. And I think that's the thing I'll be holding on to, and seed bombs, that little act of transgression and fighting back, right? We got to practice what it means to break the rules, because it's something we need to be in the habit of doing. And that's how we drive some radical change. And I love it. So that's such a fascinating conversation for me. And now I'm like, I need to go buy some things, and I'm a plant killer, so I got to figure that out. Like, I don't know what I'm gonna do.
I've been a super bad vegan because I've been a plant killer. Well, because I eat them all the time, but also because I couldn't garden for shit for a long time. And then I finally figured it out, and I'm really proud.
I have not figured that out. I'm a terrible plant killer.
COVID taught me COVID. So,
Well, I don't know, the more conversations we have, the more I'm happy. I live in hippie Austin, and I'm going to be so proud when I start gardening in my yard and I have chickens in my own yard that I'm raising. And like, we're just going to, that is our thread with Three Righteous Mamas. And maybe I can be vegan like one day a week. Is it like
one day a week's pretty amazing. I have no expectation that the world should or could be vegan. None. So
I love it. Food as justice, y'all.
Yeah.